Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into something kind of different. It's a personal story about living with some pretty severe tinnitus. But what's really interesting here is how the person actually learned to use their tinnitus. They found a way to make it a tool, especially for sleeping better. It's not just about dealing with the ringing, but turning it into a positive. So we've got their story and we've got some research. Let's dive in.
What really struck me right away was that this isn't about like some miracle cure or just a mild case of tinnitus. Our source has Bohr syndrome, and that means their hearing loss and the tinnitus that comes with it they're really intense. At times they even describe feeling dizzy because of how loud it is.
Wow. I can't even imagine trying to sleep with that much going on. I mean,
Yeah.
most people would probably grab earplugs or a white noise machine right away. Did our source try any of those things?
Oh yeah, they did. At first they tried changing their sleeping position, like avoiding having their ear right up against the pillow,
Hmm.
because that can make the sounds even louder. They also tried using white noise. But even with hearing aids, they had to turn the volume up so high. It was just way too loud to be able to keep doing that.
So, what happened? How did they get from struggling with this incredibly loud tinnitus to actually being able to use it to their advantage?
That's where things get really fascinating. Instead of fighting the tinnitus, they kind of decided to go with it. They decided
Yeah.
to embrace this idea of turning weakness into strength, you
Hmm.
know? And they realized that the tinnitus itself could actually be their white noise.
Hold on. Are you saying they just kind of leaned into the ringing? How does that even work?
It's a really cool example of how we can change our thinking about things. Think of it like this. You're lying in bed trying to sleep, but your mind is racing, going over a million different things. Instead of trying to fight those thoughts, you gently shift your focus to your breath. Our source did something similar, but they did it with their tinnitus.
Okay, I think I see what you're getting at. But how did they actually make that change? Did they have any particular techniques?
They did, and this is where the personal part of their story really stands out. They started connecting their tinnitus with the feeling of stress leaving their body. It's almost as if it became this auditory signal telling them that tension was releasing.
So instead of thinking something's wrong, it became things are getting better.
Exactly. And this mental shift actually had a physical impact. They talk about this feeling of relief washing over them as they focused on the tinnitus, like a sigh of relief, and it really helped them fall asleep easier.
That's incredible. It almost sounds like meditation or mindfulness.
You're right on the money. And this wasn't just a temporary thing either. Over time, they described the tinnitus becoming more of a background sensation, like when they weren't actively paying attention to it. It was still there, but it wasn't that intrusive, unwelcome feeling anymore.
So they went from this constant awful ringing to actually finding a sense of peace in it. That's a pretty remarkable change. But I have to ask, if they're so accustomed to this intense tinnitus now, wouldn't it be hard for them to hear other sounds?
That's a great question. And it leads to something kind of paradoxical. Our source actually says that their tinnitus can get louder than the sounds around them sometimes.
Wait, how's that possible? Shouldn't their brain just tune it out after a while?
It's not that the brain completely ignores the sound. It's more about what we choose to focus on. Think about when you suddenly noticed the hum of your refrigerator. It was always there, you just weren't paying attention to it. Our source has gotten really good at tuning into their tinnitus, so much so that it can sometimes drown out other noises.
So it's like they've developed this superpower, the ability to control what they hear.
I love that. And what's even better is that they now use this superpower intentionally. When they have trouble sleeping, they focus on their tinnitus. It's like a tool to quiet their mind and drift off.
It's like having this built-in sleep aid, always ready to go. No apps, no white noise machines, nothing.
Exactly. And the thing that's most remarkable to me is that all of this started with a choice to change how they viewed this unpleasant sensation. It wasn't about making the tinnitus go away magically. It was about reframing what it meant, what purpose it served.
So what can we take away from this experience? It seems like there's a lot more to unpack here than just managing tinnitus.
Oh, absolutely. This story opens up a really interesting conversation about the power of perception. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
So it's pretty amazing how our source was able to take something as debilitating as severe tinnitus and actually make it work for them. You know, it really gets you thinking about all the things we automatically label as bad or negative, and if maybe there's a different way to look at them.
You're absolutely right. This story goes beyond just tinnitus. It's really about the power of perception. We tend to quickly categorize our experiences as either good or bad. But what if those labels are actually holding us back? What if they're limiting our potential?
That's an interesting thought. So, are you saying that we should try to find the good in everything, even in things that are genuinely painful or difficult?
I wouldn't say it's about finding the good in everything. It's more about recognizing that human experience is complex. Sometimes the things we see as negative can actually have a purpose or even lead to unexpected growth.
Okay, I see the distinction. So, it's not about denying that something is uncomfortable or difficult, but exploring if there's maybe a different way to approach it.
Exactly. It's about asking ourselves, what if there's more to this than I'm seeing right now?
Can you give us some examples of how this might look in everyday life?
Absolutely. Let's take stress, for example. We often see it as the enemy, something to avoid at all costs. But research actually shows that a certain amount of stress can be beneficial. It can help us focus better, boost our performance, and even make us more resilient.
So instead of getting caught up in the anxiety and overwhelm of stress, we could see it as a sign that we're pushing ourselves, that we're growing and expanding our capabilities.
Exactly. It's like reframing a weightlifting session. You don't see the sore muscles as a sign of failure, but as proof that you're building strength.
That's a great analogy. What about other emotions, like boredom? We're constantly told to stay busy, to avoid boredom as much as possible. But could boredom also have a hidden benefit?
Oh, absolutely. Boredom can spark creativity and innovation. When we're bored, our minds are free to wander, to make new connections, and come up with fresh ideas. It's like giving our brain some downtime, to recharge and come up with something new.
This makes me think of a study I read about, where people were asked to do a creative task after either doing something boring or something stimulating. And the group that had been bored actually came up with more original and innovative solutions.
Exactly. It might seem counterintuitive, but stepping away from constant stimulation can actually unlock our creative potential. It's like clearing out all the clutter in our minds to make space for something new.
So, what you're saying is that even emotions we typically see as negative, like stress or boredom, can actually serve a purpose and have positive effects if we're willing to shift our perspective.
Exactly. And this principle isn't just limited to our inner experiences.
Mm.
We can also apply it to challenges and setbacks we face in the outside world.
That's interesting. So, instead of seeing a failure or a rejection as proof that we're not good enough, could we reframe it as a learning opportunity, a chance to get better and come back stronger?
Precisely. Think of it as feedback, not a dead end. Every setback gives us valuable information that we can use to grow and improve.
This all connects back to the idea of resilience, doesn't it? It's not about avoiding challenges completely, but about developing that ability to bounce back from them, to use them as fuel for growth.
You're exactly right.
Eh.
And a big part of building resilience is developing a flexible mindset, that ability to see things from different angles
Yeah.
and to adapt to whatever comes our way.
This is all making a lot of sense, but I imagine some of our listeners might be thinking, okay, this sounds great in theory, but how do I actually put this into practice? Changing our ingrained patterns of thinking can feel pretty overwhelming.
You make a great point, and that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll dig into some practical techniques for reframing our perceptions and putting these principles into action.
We've really explored a lot in this deep dive. We heard how someone with severe tinnitus was able to change their whole outlook and actually make it work for them. And we talked about how our perception shapes our experience, not just with physical things, but with emotions and even tough situations.
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on the idea of using this reframing in our own lives, but I bet some listeners are thinking, okay, where do I even start?
Exactly. It's one thing to understand it, but doing it is a whole other challenge.
Absolutely. It's a process, not a magic wand. But there are some real practical things we can do to start shifting how we see things and use this power of reframing. And the first step, and this is super important, is awareness.
Okay, so what does that look like in real life?
It's about paying attention to that voice in our head,
Hmm.
the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening. Let's say you're stuck in traffic and you feel that frustration building up, that impatience. Instead of letting those emotions take over, just stop for a second and notice them.
So it's like pausing that autopilot reaction
Yeah.
and just becoming curious about our own thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. And as you're watching those thoughts and feelings, ask yourself, is this story helping me? Is it useful or is it making things harder?
That's a really good question because so often those negative thoughts just keep spiraling and we don't even realize how much they're affecting us.
Right. So once you're aware of those stories, the next step is to question them. Ask yourself, is there a different way to look at this?
Like with that traffic jam. Instead of thinking this is ruining my day, I'm going to be late, You could think, well, now I have some extra time. Maybe I can listen to that podcast I've been meaning to catch up on, or make some calls.
Exactly. Or let's say you experience a setback at work. Instead of saying, I'm a failure, I'll never make it, you could reframe it as, this is a chance to learn.
Yeah.
What can I do differently next time?
It's like moving away from that, I'm stuck, this is it kind of thinking, and going towards a more, okay, this is a chance to learn and grow mindset.
Exactly. And remember, reframing isn't about pretending things are perfect or denying what's real. It's about choosing a perspective that gives you power,
Yeah.
that helps you move forward in a good way.
So it's not about being fake positive. It's about finding a better way to deal with the situation, even if it's still hard.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's important to remember that this takes practice. You're not going to get it perfect every time, and that's okay. The more you practice, the easier it becomes.
Like working out a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And eventually, you'll find yourself catching those negative thoughts quicker and choosing a better perspective without even thinking about it.
So, for everyone listening, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this. Pay attention to those stories you tell yourself. Question them. Try out different perspectives and see what happens. You might be surprised by how much power you have to change your experience.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone. There's so many resources out there. Books, podcasts, therapists, coaches, people who can help you learn these skills and deal with the tough parts along the way.
This deep dive has been a fascinating look into the power of perception. We hope it's inspired you to see the world and yourself in a new way, and to embrace the possibilities that open up when we choose to reframe our experiences.